Now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce today's first speaker, Jana Beranek, SVP User Experience with Ipsos in the U.S. Jana, you have the floor.
Great, thanks, Ellen, and thank you everyone for joining us. I'm Jana Beranek, and I'm going to get us started. I'm also joined by two of my colleagues who will be sharing with us as well, Dan Delaney and Megan Mockamer, two of our UX research directors. So this is no doubt a challenging time, and we have observed that our clients are being presented with a variety of new problems to solve on a daily basis, if not more often. The idea behind this webinar is not only to acknowledge the challenging situations that many businesses are in while trying to conduct research, but also to approach this from an action-oriented and strategic point of view so you can make progress on your 2020 product roadmaps. We want all of you to walk away and feel as though you have a better idea of how to chart a course forward in the coming months. We know one thing for sure. This is a moment of significant change. We've gotten a lot of questions in the recent weeks about what kind of research is most important, how to execute research in the current situation, and if certain projects should even move forward. This webinar is a direct response to the challenges that we know you're facing. So to start off, let's state the obvious. This is our new reality. People are using technology now more than ever. The data here is from a recent Ipsos commercial COVID-19 tracker, and the technologies shown in this chart have all seen an increase in their user base and usage in response to the pandemic. This shows what we're all living right now. In a time of social distancing and stay-at-home orders, we need technology now more than ever. We can see that connection is incredibly important right now. So people are using more social media, more instant messenger, and video chat. We also see things like streaming at an all-time high as we try to find ways to entertain ourselves, and essential needs like grocery delivery, the ability to work remotely, and accessing medical care. All these needs are being solved for with technology. While the use of some of these technologies may decrease in frequency when life returns to a new normal and people can leave their homes once again, there is an expectation we see self-reported by many that even when things go back to normal, people will continue to use these newly adopted products and services. Some families who finally got grandparents on video chat are excited about how connected it makes them feel. It turns out that grocery delivery was easier than you thought. And more people are willing to stream their favorite movies rather than go to a theater. So while it's true that these technologies are solving a need during a time of crisis, users are actually already starting to see how these services and products could continue to benefit them post-pandemic. This means that experiences that are useful, usable, and delightful may capture new audiences and be a catalyst for long-term adoption. Now, it's certainly hard to predict the future, and I know everyone's wondering what it's going to look like, but we can look to history to try and understand how this moment of crisis may lead to behavioral change. So consider the impact of World War II on women's participation in the workforce. With a large share of the working age population deployed in the war effort, women were needed in order to fill jobs in the United States. After the war, the effects of these shifts persisted, driving a major acceleration of women in the workplace, but also an actual change in social barriers and attitudes that had previously prevented that from happening. The 9/11 terrorist attack reshaped transportation security policies worldwide. There was a collective shift in societal attitudes about the trade-off between personal privacy and security. And citizens suddenly accepted higher levels of screening and surveillance in the interest of collective security. Another thing that we observe is that societal crises can have a lasting effect on consumption patterns. So the 2003 SARS outbreak in China very much changed their attitudes toward shopping because many people were afraid to go outside. So they turned to online retail. And though the 2003 crisis was short-lived, Many in China continue to use e-commerce channels, which in turn led to the rise of Alibaba and other e-commerce powerhouses. Even though an effort to look back might help, it's still hard to understand exactly how this moment will impact future behaviors. Habits are very powerful, and generally, they make it unlikely that people will change their choices of products and services. Yet, we know right now, so many habits have been broken. And in many cases, not because people wanted to change, the circumstances have dictated the need for change. So, right now, new habits are forming, and those have a chance to make long-lasting impacts on our everyday routines. While we see both a decrease of certain behaviors and an acceleration of others, the question for many companies becomes, what behaviors will have a long-lasting impact? These behaviors are ultimately the experiences we want to be designing for. So how do we begin to unpack that question? What new behaviors will have a lasting impact? In charting a revised course for 2020, this is the key takeaway. Social distancing can be an accelerator of technological reliance and adoption and act as an agent of change. Research being conducted right now can help businesses understand not only how behaviors are changing, but why. What need is a product or service solving for? Why would a user turn to a certain product to solve a problem? And by understanding the why, we can begin to piece together an answer for each individual use case that we might have. And Dan is actually going to walk us through some of those new situations.
Great, thanks, Yana. And knowing this, we would like to propose the thought that while this disruptive moment due to COVID-19, the pandemic, it certainly presents challenges to business, it also can present opportunities. And to set the stage that we're all on is that changes are occurring at a dizzying pace. And there are three areas that are sort of the most predominant ones that we actually hear from our clients. And that's the first thing is that the normal flow of business is being disrupted. Things are changed. People are working remote. There's the normal patterns of interchange have obviously changed, but also questions have come up just in terms of the nature of the market out there. So everyone's needing to adapt to the specific pattern of their business. And as a result, there's shifting roadmaps and goals. The actual plan that we began the year with, the goals we began the year with, are being modified. There's goals that are still there. Goals are changing, but it's critical to maintain some form of momentum. As we try to both plan the roadmap and plan the trip, and also to refocus those goals in a way that's relevant to the time. And we're seeing new user needs and opportunities to do social good. So we want to acknowledge that these areas and then provide some and recommend some guidance on how to move forward. So the disruption we're all feeling, the shifting roadmaps and goals that we're all dealing with, and realize that there's needs out there that we need to better understand. And we know that there's the opportunity to do social good, but what is relevant? And in terms of the digging deeper into this, the organizational disruptions that are impacting business as usual, we're facing the changing team dynamics. And in talking with our clients, there's a lot of different types of disruptions that we're dealing with because of COVID, and this is a significant one. Teams are unable to meet deadlines and goals because of illness, because of organizational changes impacting their personnel, and just the new ways needing to communicate and keep in touch with one another. There's the need to defend research initiatives, and probably everyone on the call is facing this situation in which there's the need to provide rationales as to why a study is important to conduct. Is now the proper time to do it? What about the crisis situation that people are feeling? Will the actual data that we're able to get be relevant, at some time in the future. There's also the feeling of all work environments that have been moved to 100% remote. That includes the environments in which the research is being conducted. So there's a need for vendors and partnerships that can both think creatively and execute in a remote-only environment. And with all this, we found that there's a need for clients are feeling a need for a strategic sounding board to help them identify what can and should move forward and what initiatives might be impacted and should possibly be delayed or reshaped. Now, researchers, designers, product managers are all dealing with rapidly changing product roadmaps and goal reassessment. And as a result, what are the key ways that that's manifesting itself? Well, things do need to keep moving. Business doesn't stop. And the key is to maintain momentum. And we've seen and worked with clients that are changing goals that were initially set for 2020 and redirecting them to learn as much as they can about this social moment and how it might affect their business and time even beyond this immediate time in the environment. It's become all the more important to investigate shifting user priorities. And that means that immediate needs are changing based on the current environment. And product teams are trying to understand both immediate needs and what might be changing for the long term. Are there roots here that are being set that, as Yana mentioned earlier, are going to trigger significant changes once we're past this situation? Sometimes when you're within the moment, it's hard to realize the significance, of the long-term effects that are going to come out of this. And, we have become very engaged in rethinking planned projects and examining what kinds of research can benefit for clients, at this moment in time. And, we know that all research is not a great fit for this moment in time, and we have to, as a result, we need to focus on research that's going to benefit your business the most. So in some situations, something that might have been planned, like an obvious example would be an in-person kiosk study at a restaurant. And given the current climate, not only is this research impossible to conduct, it should be deprioritized compared to the website or mobile app ordering. Those are situations that might be much more relevant to both the immediate time and the new patterns that are being put into place. And and additionally, researchers, designers, and products they're all dealing with these rapidly changing experiences. So the stakeholders are looking to their research partners to help strategically address them. And as part of that, it is this rethinking process, this using of us as a sounding board or resources to help them think through which path is the right path to go. So the context of all this is that users have a host of new needs, and they're adopting technologies to meet them. And the opportunities, to understand which are changing, they're using new technologies, and now more than ever, they're relying on trusted products, services, and brands that provide good experiences right now. But they're also there's new user segments that are emerging that are engaging with products in new and different ways, that also potentially products and experiences they've never used before. Inclusive design is critical for these folks in terms of as we learn about their needs and their expectations, because their interaction with our products and services may continue after this moment in time. And these because these behaviors can lead to new habits, new products, new product affinity. New users are adopting technology every day, and they want an experience that works for them. And these new behaviors at this moment can create new habits. And what I'd like to do now is take a look at some new examples of things that we've seen that actually can, the tech users are excuse me, that we'd like to take a look at some new tech uses that are creating some new behaviors that could have long-term effects. Well, one of them is telemedicine. It's been adopted to limit exposure to the front lines, in the very severe cases of COVID, and for both their protection, but also to meet the expanded need of patients. And this is just one example. There's many medical sectors have shifted to remote options in the interest of protection during COVID, but then also to provide help for their normal patients too. And there's the potential that in the future, building out tools like this will most likely become commonplace, not only for times of crisis, but also for the ability to provide more acceptable and more the ability to provide more continuous care and more care for populations that might normally be able to get them. So it's a great source of expanded care options that provide far-reaching and convenience effects that could be effective for many different healthcare situations, which ends as a result in the ability to add expanded care options that last beyond this moment in time. There's another example in terms of technology being adapted to meet new needs, and that is through the example of Nextdoor. Now, for context, and for those who aren't familiar with it, Nextdoor is a neighborhood platform where users must register their home address, and then they receive an activation code by mail. And the purpose was for neighborhood communication, sort of a hyper-local Craigslist. There's also just a lot of quirky commentary between the neighbors and so forth. But it's been an ongoing sort of neighborhood communication app. But in recent years, or in recent weeks rather, some New Yorkers have logged on, and for the first time, they've used it with a more focused and urgent set of questions. And last week, Nextdoor told CNN that engagement in New York had nearly doubled. As a result of the COVID situation, they've added new features to the platform, including a map, which neighbors wishing to help can add their location and volunteering abilities. And the customer fast-tracked the rollout of a groups feature in which users can congregate around particular topics and causes. They've also added aspects that allow for local announcements, safety guidelines, very timely things, so that it actually it's changed its nature from being sort of a community forum for just exchanging observations on and recommending different lawn care resources and so forth, to the ability to actually adapt to the needs of the community in areas that are much more serious. This is also an example of a technology that's being used in a new way based on the nature of today, but that could have some long-range effects, so that the behaviors are changing. There's a new need that might be surfacing, and that could once again last past the current situation. And this is, learning about a technology like this in terms of why, what's the benefit, how is Nextdoor adapting in a way that could be meaningful, is something that could help us understand behaviors, needs, and how technology is meeting them in a new way. In terms of technology being repurposed for different use cases, there's a great example of Trello. Many in the group may have used Trello. It's a great business resource that is able to facilitate group interactions. But in terms of the current situation, there's families are in indefinite lockdown, and they're turning to Trello, the planning app, used for business to actually help run their own households. They're discovering that the software that they use to organize their workdays might also help manage their kids while they're being quarantined at home. And I think we're all experiencing different situations of, home offices, kids at home, the actual need to provide not only help in terms of them keeping up with their different schoolwork, but they're actually there's sort of almost a need to assign different roles and responsibilities within the home. And what we're seeing parents do is they're discovering that the software that they use at work could also help manage their kids while they're quarantined at home. Replacing dry erase boards, Google calendars, even plain old pen and paper. And this is an example of a workplace productivity tool being used for home. It's not really that surprising. It's in this new normal where families are isolated within the same space, and what was just once home has now become a school and a workplace. There's a need for new forms of support, and we're observing in a situation like with Trello that people are sort of like hacking the tool to apply it to these new needs. And parents finding a use for a tool like this now could find a permanent use for them in the future. So Trello's got the opportunity to see new use cases for their product and design for needs like household planning and organization. So this is a great example of a technology which is being designed for one purpose and is being used in this situation to meet a need, to behaviors coming out of it, to form habits that have a long-term, the need could be longer term, which could be addressed by understanding how that need is being fulfilled now. There's also a great example that we talked about in terms of there are new user segments that are emerging. And in terms of the embrace of technology, we're seeing that people over the age of 55 are adopting new technologies, especially services like grocery delivery pickup, and also in terms of on the younger end of the over 55 scale, Ipsos research has shown that these patterns are happening. There's an increased use of social media and video conferencing tools to maintain contact, while remaining safe. And so that we're seeing these trends of social media, video conferencing as patterns that actually could continue as the force of the immediate situation and environment caused the trial, but there's a lot of benefits to it, and we've all probably experienced parts of this in terms of the different calls and so forth. But on at the older end of the over 55 scale, ZDNet, the online tech publication, reported a story just last week about an assisted living community complex in Northern California called Eschaton. That's where and residents and staff are doing their best to create a shared sense of hope, of solidarity, through the pandemic. And they found that tools like AI-powered voice assistants provide a more engaging platform for seniors looking for strong connections to their communities than what they had originally had available. The Eschaton Director of Strategic Initiatives was quoted as saying that talking is really natural, and we all know how to do it. And we're seeing that the better that our residents are getting with voice assistants like Alexa and Google Home, they find that Alexa and Google Home are getting to better understand them. As you're interfacing with them, they're getting better. It's like you're both learning together. So it's encouraging our residents to use them more. And when Eschaton first started rolling out voice assistant devices in residents' rooms, to address what they were concerned about in terms of the increased social isolation, since the visiting rights were no one could visit them during this period of time. They saw this quick uptake. Nearly 100% of the residents in one community were regularly using the devices, and they had planned on a slow deploy to other communities that are part of their their overall network of communities. But they actually sped up the deployment quickly in response to the pandemic. And they found that residents are now using the voice assistants regularly to call family members, keep up to speed on community news, listen to the jokes, among lots of other things. And they're seeing that it's actually helping to mitigate this social isolation that could have occurred as a result of the current safety measures, in the face of COVID. And by contrast, they found that the messaging apps and teleconferencing tools that were available to the SCAN residents, previously had held little interest for them, so that the uptake of this technology would actually, which might not have occurred if it wasn't for the COVID situation, might never have been tapped in, and they're seeing that it's widely accepted. So this is just one example of this broad thing which we might consider seniors. There's different experiences that are being triggered by the current situation that could have long-term effects, and also by understanding the appeal, by understanding them now, it could allow the product managers, and the companies to begin shaping those in ways that could actually better address with in essence, a new segment for them. There's also the opportunity for companies who want to do social good, and perhaps one of the biggest things in the news was one of the most far-reaching attempts to halt the spread of the virus. Apple and Google said that they were building software into smartphones that would tell people if they were recently in contact with someone who was infected. A method called contact tracing, and they both plan to start next month. The plan is to add features to their mobile operating systems that would make it available for certain apps that run by government agencies and health agencies, to be able to monitor the growth and movement of the virus. There calls for Bluetooth radios to track the physical proximity between the phones, and if someone receives a positive COVID-19 diagnosis, they can report it through the app, and the users who have been in close contact would get a notification. They chose perhaps the most privacy-friendly of the many schemes, that could allow smartphone contact tracing, and it's something that is, an application of the potential of the smartphone devices that is arising out of this current situation, and they, as a result, that this is something that might not have ever occurred, but the fact of using something like Bluetooth technology or something like this, which is perhaps the best way to address some privacy issues, is once again something that may never have occurred outside of this. These were just a series of specific, what we thought of as maybe torn from the headlines examples of situations going on now in which people are using technologies in different ways based on the current pandemic situation, but there's behaviors that are occurring that might go beyond the current situation. And now what I'd like to do is have my colleague Megan discuss with you some strategic approaches as to how to deal with this situation.
Thank you, Dan. So for this next portion, we're really going to be talking about action and what to do next. And there's no doubt that this moment of disruption is leading to new use cases, new user segments, and emerging needs, which we just saw in Dan's walkthrough of rip through the headlines examples. And right now, research is critical to understand these changes and learn from them. In terms of where to focus, there are several key technologies impacted by shelter in place, especially essential and e-commerce needs, entertainment and expertise, and communication. By looking at these areas through UX research, we can understand emerging needs as well as changing behaviors. And insights can lead to new product opportunities, innovation, and opportunities for future development. So what I want to do now is kind of walk through some possible avenues of exploration for your product roadmap. I'm going to walk through just some of these as there are probably so many more that didn't even make our list here. Privacy issues are a key priority for most companies these days, and this particular focus has a lot of implications when thinking about the expanded use of technology that most users are experiencing right now. By focusing research and design on things like perceptions and implementation of platform security features or communication tools, you're both prioritizing a critical aspect of functionality from a long-term perspective and collecting data on something that's top of mind and important for users right now. Secondly, we hear a lot about inclusive design in the user experience community, but too often accessibility is an added-on layer of product design that's much further down the planned roadmap than what is actually needed for users with a wide range of disabilities. Right now is an incredibly important time to make sure the experiences you design work for all possible users. And by shifting focus to accessibility in 2020, the changes and iterations with these customers in mind will have a lasting impact. Additionally, communication and connectedness are certainly avenues to explore. We've seen plenty of examples, even in this presentation, of the uptick of these technologies. The bottom line is that communication should be intuitive and effective for all users, regardless of their level of experience. Now is the time to really ask those research questions that both simplify and enhance communication tools, whether it's for B2B, B2C, or person-to-person communication. It should also come as no surprise that entertainment can be a really useful research focus right now. As people look to fill their time, companies that can provide fun and delight have the upper hand in gaining affinity. So things like streaming, social media, hobby or expertise-oriented tools are relied on right now during this time of isolation. However, they're not the only experiences that can be fun. There are opportunities for delight with many different products and services, and taking the time now to learn and understand how to create joy in these experiences can be really rewarding long term. As for reliable information, I won't belabor the point of this because we're all experiencing it right now. In times of COVID, and frankly far before the pandemic even started, there was a need for companies to step up and be a reliable source of trustworthy information. The next door example that Dan talked through is a great example of how safety and health information can be incorporated into a platform when it's needed the most. Last on our list, although as I mentioned, there are so many more avenues of exploration right now, are digital tools and enterprise. So really think about what problems your platform can solve for in the current environment, whether it be business, schooling, or simply organization and time management. Looking at the current use and the needs of these tools can open the door for future innovations and product design. Through research and design, there are also many opportunities to do social good with products and services. And human-centered design can do a lot. It can address inequities in social class, gender, race, ethnicity. It can truly be for everyone. It can help make essential workers safer. It can keep human intention and needs at the core of a product. It can do things like make healthcare tools more accessible, which we saw in the example of telemedicine. And it can make critical information and alerts more accessible as well. So now the big question that I'm sure you all have been waiting for us to answer, what next? These next recommendations are to help guide you in this moment as you reshape your research roadmaps and carry on with product development in 2020. So first and foremost, go prepared to stakeholder conversations. You want to work to provide knowledge on why a particular project is important to prioritize. And if possible, it's helpful to provide hypotheses on how this particular moment in time will help shape future design iterations or really influence the adoption of your product. You want to customize research design for every project. The one-size-fits-all solution is not going to work for every project right now. It's really important to consider each project, each question, each business objective in isolation. And it's critical that you customize and consider every project so that you can shape the method and the approach There are a ton of remote solutions right now, but it's really important to figure out how to actually tackle the questions and the objectives that you're most interested in. You also want to be flexible. So right now, in this time of rapid change, you want to be ready to shift some priorities around and be flexible with 2020 goals. The goals that you set in January may no longer be the goals that you want to carry out through the rest of the year. Considering the new needs of your users and the ways to get users to readopt and integrate your products into their lives can really help you figure out what those goals actually should be. And, again, all of this is trying to design for not only experiences right now, but also after this pandemic. You also want to be curious. Use this moment as a time to better understand the needs of your customer and how new and updated experiences can benefit them. This is something that as researchers, as designers, as product managers, we're all really good at. So take the time to be creative and think outside of the box and really understand what's going on the ground and how your experiences can be, innovative and forward-thinking. Be open-minded to what you might learn and what actions might be needed to address problems and pain points. You also want to be sensitive to the pandemic climate and the tone and the manner of your research. This is something that we're really living every single day right now. You never know what individual users are dealing with as you interact with them, so be sensitive in formulating things like discussion guide questions. You also want to be flexible with recruiting and incentives. Participants may need to change or miss their session for family or health reasons. For example, we've seen stakeholders decide to still pay incentives if someone has to cancel the session because of health concerns. Of course, there are many scenarios where participants need flexibility right now. Example would be a sudden job change or a family situation like homeschooling kids. Reasons not to penalize people for dropping out. Our response rates are better than ever. I'm sure everyone's feeling that with users being at home and wanting to participate and share their thoughts and ideas. But we also want to be sensitive to the rapidly changing circumstances of participants right now. So while this pandemic will end, newfound relationships with technology may not. And really, we want to use this year to understand societal needs for technological solutions and do good, inclusive design to help address those needs. So consider how current product offerings can be retooled or enhanced to address emerging needs. And, expand possible user segments. Consider things like older users or users with accessibility needs that need your products and services now more than ever. Times of disruption bring insights for those who conduct research, and insights bring opportunities for a lasting customer change. Providing users help through product and service design enhancements in a time of crisis will make them users for life. And companies that show they're truly listening and responding right now will be the winners in the end. Thank you. And now we'll take time for some Q&A. And I'm going to start off with this question. Yelena, Dan, feel free to hop in. I'll read it. While participants are more available to undertake usability testing at the moment, what kinds of situational issues when conducting research during COVID-19 have the potential to bias the results? I can go ahead and kick this one off. So I think this is, first and foremost, a really great question. It's a question we've gotten a lot in many different forms and capacities. But the root of the question really is in the study objectives and what you're trying to learn. So, during shelter in place, there are going to be some limitations to what people can reasonably reflect on versus what they're currently doing in this moment. So, for example, participants can discuss how they use technology on a typical day to commute pre-pandemic and how they might expect it will change once they return to typical activities. But asking them to participate in something like a diary study and reflect every time they use a maps application while commuting would not be entirely accurate right now based on an account of typical life. And that's why it's so incredibly important to not only think about the objectives, but also the balance of what you can learn in this moment in formulating the study method. So sometimes it's helpful to just go all the way back to the drawing board and think about what you want to learn right now, what we can answer right now, and what is reasonable to ask participants to reflect on versus what they would be recording in sort of a daily real-time capacity, and how that might be important in the research. So, again, environment's always going to play a role, and certainly the environment is playing a huge role right now in all research, but I think going back to those business objectives and questions can be really helpful in guiding and navigating different biases that occur right now.
Megan, there's another question, this is Dan, that I'd like to address. And there's a question that was asked that, why are accessibility and inclusivity more important than before? And I think that it's a really good question, but I think there's two sides of it. I think the extremes of the current situation are shining a light on some needs and opportunities that may always have been there, and that the situation has caused needs that have needed addressing, and people have been applying things to address them. Similar to perhaps the situation of the personal assistant devices, in the senior care facility. There's also new behaviors that are occurring that might not have occurred without the extremes of this situation, that do present some opportunities of sort of, a trial, new uses that actually, by learning about them, could actually, address both the a continued, habit information, but the inclusive design may be needed to actually make full use of it.
All right, it looks like we have another question here. And Jana, I don't know if you maybe want to take this one. How do we anticipate and detect the new normal?
So the question again, please, was how do we anticipate and test for the new normal?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think, this really goes back to why our behavior is changing. So I think, we need to understand how people are using technology differently. We need to understand context. And when it comes to actual testing, we are moving ahead with remote testing, just like you would with everything else that's going online in terms of how we're working remotely. So we have found a number of different ways to retool our research to actually use new platforms that allow us to have different kinds of conversations, different ways to observe users, different ways to understand their behaviors through online tools that, just like everything else, are being repurposed. A month ago we were using Teams for internal business, and now we are using Teams to help us test mobile apps and laptops applications with people. We are looking at ways to use online diaries differently to understand how people are interacting with products when we can't be in the room with them. And so, really understanding the context of use as closely as we can. And, this also gives us an opportunity that we sometimes really don't plan for, which is capturing behaviors, at home in a much more realistic setting that we're not always willing to do or able to do, where we think we need to bring people into a lab. Now we're really getting that chance to see how people are repurposing products and services in their own space with all the other things that they have going on, which is quite a lot at home these days. And so switching to those remote testing options not only gives us the option to continue with research rather than putting things on hold, and also to understand what about products and services make them unique, or what particular pain points are we really seeing if we let someone go use the product in their own home. Do you have anything to add, Megan?
No, nothing to add. I do think we probably have time for one more question. I see we're a few minutes over, and I think we could all kind of jump in here. The question is, how are you building questions about COVID-19 into your research while being sensitive to people's personal situations and the impacts of the crisis on their health and financial situations? So I think this has roots in a couple of different things. The first is going back to that sensitivity during the time of the pandemic, and knowing that you don't understand the full backstory of each individual participant before you go into session and what they might be dealing with. So as researchers, it's always really important for us to go in with, empathy and active listening skills. But I think now more than ever, it's really important to make sure people feel comfortable. So if you do have questions in your guide about COVID, feel free to add language to the guide to make sure that participants are comfortable talking about it, comfortable answering those questions. Let them know they can always feel free to not answer a question, and try to, whenever possible, bring in a very sensitive moderator tone into your sessions and give people an out in case they don't feel comfortable talking about it. Again, we don't necessarily know if people have been personally impacted or even, are dealing with the situation and the trauma from it a little bit differently than other people. So it's really important that while these questions are things we do want to be learning about and exploring, that the moderator really handles each individual participant differently and gives them the opportunity to either speak about it or move past it if they don't feel comfortable talking. Jana, Dan, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I would just go ahead, Dan.
Oh, go on. No, it's just I think that the tone and manner is really important, and sometimes in the course of research we can be a bit matter of fact, because we're zeroing in on a specific area, or in UX some sort of aspect of the interaction. But here I think the tone and manner is Megan framed up is really important. There's a sensitiveness and a willing to adapt, that is important, and also just the context of what the person might be radiating in ways that we might not normally be attuned to in a given scenario. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. We are experts, I think, in empathy. We spend a lot of time there, and so this is no time to let our guard down on that, and really think about what's the user experience of the interview or the research session that they're having with us. So, UX ourselves.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that is all the time that we have for today. Thank you all so much for joining and spending the last 45 minutes or so with us. We're always here for more questions, so if you think of anything, please feel free to reach out to us. And thanks again for your time today.